So from who is we, who is welcoming you actually, it's the team of product managers who are the product management for the 3D Secure Issuer service from Netcetera. It is a comprehensive solution that we offer for issuers who want to implement a service that supports 3DS protocols 1.0 and 2.0. And I will lead you through the webinar today. My name is Martina Forster. My colleagues will be joining me in the questions and answers part of the webinar. So let's kick off with a few thoughts about what is actually friction or frictionless. I'm quite sure that you have very different reasons. You might have different reasons why you are interested in increasing frictionless transactions at all. Probably for many of you, it's also from the schemes, one of the motivations, as they are pushing a lot that frictionless transactions have a higher relative amount in relation to the challenged transactions. And then at the same time, you might also be impacted by PSD2 legislation, which is mainly in Europe a topic, or it's only in Europe, in the economic area of Europe, where the online transactions require a strong customer authentication. So you have also this regulation to fulfill, and at the same time, you want to keep your cardholders protected from fraud. Yourself, you want to keep protected from fraud, and to fulfill all of these requirements, that's why we are here today. So you want to increase at the same time frictionless, but also maintain security or keep control of security for your online transactions. Before diving into the topic further, we would like to learn from you what you actually already do to increase frictionless transactions while also maintaining security. And we have a small poll for you, which we'd be pleased if you can provide some insight. So you should see the question, and you can actually choose different answers. It's a multiple choice question. Okay, so we got some feedback, and I'm happy to share with you that we have about 55% is going to support the new EMV 3DS protocol. About 64% are using a risk tool for fraud prevention and risk-based authentication. 45%, almost half of you, are going to use PSD2 SCA, strong customer authentication exemptions. And also more than half, 55%, are going to reduce cardholder efforts as well for the enrollment of cards into the 3D Secure, And about 17% have also marked other as activities to reduce friction. Many thanks for these insights. Gives us a bit of feeling of who is in the webinar as well. So let's kick off and just have a very short look into the new protocol EMV 3DS, the 3DS 2.0 protocol, as it also is called. It's currently being rolled out in the market. It's going probably to last one more year or a bit more, as we estimate, probably end of 2020 or so, that really all banks or most of the banks are going to support 2.0 transactions. What the highlight actually is for us, or in terms of this topic of frictionless transactions, is that much more data is being sent through that protocol. So you as a bank, as an issuer, you have much more data available, which you can use for risk-based authentication or for also risk assessment in general of a transaction. So that leads me to immediately the next slide. The risk-based authentication as well. I don't want to dive too much into the topic, but as we have also seen, most of you already use such a risk tool during authentication in order to provide frictionless transactions to your cardholders. What is here the benefit out of EMV 3DS is that you have much more data available once these transactions are going to increase in the market. So currently it's still mostly 1.0 protocol transactions, as you all might be aware. But once the new protocol version is going to increase, also the data is going to increase, and you will have much better assessments and higher precision for your risk-based decisions that you might take. So the benefits of a combination of a risk tool together with pretty secure, I summarized here, as it leads us then as well to the reason why merchant whitelisting should be of interest as well. So in the case of low risk assessment, I assume most of you do that already. You have an ACS which is accepting such a transaction as a frictionless transaction without any further challenge, any further cardholder authentication method applied, which would result in a frictionless mode. And maybe we can add here that we have had customers over the past years already using this approach, also with 1.0 protocol of really secure, and it helped them a lot to reduce abandonments of transactions already for this version of the protocol. Then what it helps as well, if you have a risk tool in place, it's also that you have an increased confidence thanks to this higher precision of risk assessments. You can actually monitor all your transactions, and even if you would like to apply exemptions such as a merchant whitelisting or a low value payment from the PSD2 regulations, then the risk tool is still supervising these transactions, and it could jump in as it is always on. It could actually oversteer any exemption, which can provide you as well more security for the implementation of any of these PSD2 strong customer authentication exemptions. At least that's where we also see a huge benefit of a combination. However, as we have heard already from the September 14th, there will be a limit to these risk-based frictionless payments. You might also already be aware of, at least the ones who are in the European area, there is this threshold that is based on the bank's fraud rate. According to your fraud rate, you will be allowed to do frictionless transactions based on risk only up to a certain amount. So this could be 500 euro in the best case, and if you have a lower fraud rate, then it's maybe 250 or 100 euro as a maximum amount of a transaction, or it can even go down to zero. I mean, it could be restricted completely until you have a better fraud rate in place. That's why we think that merchant whitelisting is such a powerful exemption, as it could still be used even if the risk exemption from PSD2 would be restricted to a lower limit, to lower amounts only. Now, the focus of this webinar is merchant whitelisting, and we start immediately after the next survey with what we provide as merchant whitelisting. Let us first have a look at what you actually plan. And I start another poll. What do you plan? Are you going to actually support merchant whitelisting, this exception, which is called also trusted recipients or trusted beneficiaries exemption? And when are you planning to do so? So we have about 9% who are going to support merchant whitelisting latest from the 14th of September, and about 27% who is going to support it earliest in the last quarter of that year. And we have a few who are going to support it in 2020, earliest from 2020. And then we have about half of you who are saying you're probably going to implement it, so not yet decided. So let's hope we can convince you a bit more about from its use and also its ease of use, I hope. So merchant whitelisting as our focus topic, what is it actually? Very simply said, yes, consumers can shop frictionless at merchants whom they and you as a bank trust. So that's our premise that we thought is very important. It has to be a whitelisting feature where actually both the issuer and the cardholder can choose that they trust a specific merchant. I chose this flower shop as it might be one of the cases where you can really trust them. It's not going to be used fraudulent, but anyways, it could be any kind of online shop that you might want to trust or your cardholders might want to trust. To start with how we from etc. implement this merchant whitelisting feature, as we have heard, it is according to PSD2 a possible exemption from strong customer authentication, which tells that the cardholder should actually have previously placed the merchant on a whitelist, or they call it list of trusted beneficiaries. We, with our implementation, aim at a compliance that you can be compliant with PSD2. And we also aim at the compliance with the major card schemes. So we have looked at all and also had a lot of discussions with the major card schemes like MasterCard and Visa. And we hoped now this feature implementation, or we are actually trustful that this feature implementation is going to be compliant to these requirements. The implementation, how we have it, is going to support all major card schemes, and it can be used on all protocol versions currently in place. So if there is 3DS 1.0 transactions coming to the ACS, we would support it as well as if it is a 2.1, the currently released specific protocol version transaction. Also in summer, we are going to implement the MasterCard extension to 2.1, or also later on subsequent versions of the protocol. All of them can be used together with that feature. The feature is deeply integrated with our ACS, which would allow as well a very flexible combination with different authenticators, such as a risk assessment, but there is also other options in there, and also the different challenge methods that are supported from the ACS. So I would like to start you showing this feature with a demo. I have to briefly switch the environment. What you can see here, it's a demo shop. So we are in the checkout process. It's a technical version of a shop. I entered my card number and I'm shopping at this etc. demo merchant. If I would leave it like this, but I add now here a name, let's say Zalando, as we will have also different merchant names that can be whitelisted. And this at this Zalando shop, I would now do a transaction. And it prompts me for an authentication, which I have registered for. My registered method is an OTP, a one-time passcode with a security question. So I have received already the SMS sending me a one-time passcode. And I enter it now from my mobile phone. As a security question, it's an easy one. And then I have here this option to actually add this merchant to the whitelist. The text of this checkbox of this option is of course configurable. And if I now check this checkbox and I pay, then Zalando is going to be added to my whitelist on this specific card. So I have a transaction status yes. And if I would just do another transaction again, same card at the same shop, and I would buy again at this shop, then I expect that I would not be prompted anymore for a cardholder authentication. So I would not be prompted for an OTP, security answer, and so on, but it should be processed frictionless, which actually is true. Transaction status, yes, from the ACS. And to give you a little bit better insight of what actually, what actually was just done, I would like to show you the admin UI. It's our user interface for call center employees. And I type up here the card number. For this card number, I can see here the registered authentication method, OTP with security question, my mobile. And then down here, I have all the activities which happened recently on that card. And if I open up the last two transactions, then I can see that the first one I did was a transaction from Zalando. And I added this merchant in the end of the transaction flow to the list of trusted merchants. The second transaction that I tried was also successful, and it was applied with this merchant whitelist exemption. Now, I could, as a cardholder, have sometimes later maybe not such a trust anymore in Zalando. Maybe I have had some fraudulent activity or some chargebacks, hassles, and I'd like to remove it from the list of trusted merchants. That's when I would use such a registration portal. This one here is not branded for any bank, so it's just how it's blank for product demonstrations. Usually you would have here your bank logo and text and so on. But for illustration, I would like to show you how it could work. I identify myself using my card number. I accept the terms and conditions. Then I'm prompted for also authentication. So it uses the same method which is registered for payments. I receive again a one-time passcode via SMS. And I provide the security answer. And by clicking next, I get to the card management menu where I have different options, what I want to do, maybe change the authentication method through an update or so. But now I'd like to edit the list of trusted merchants. I have currently 3 trusted merchants on that card, and I'd like to remove Zalando again from that card. So that's the way how a card holder can remove a merchant from the whitelist himself. I'd like to summarize briefly what we have just seen. I added a merchant to the whitelist being a card holder during a 3 years transaction. I have this option to check actually the checkbox if I want it. The precondition for doing so is that I have a 2-factor authentication registered for 3D Secure. Otherwise, it would not be compliant to PSD2. And this whitelisting can actually happen during a purchase or even also during a non-payment authentication. As you might know, non-payment authentications are supported from 3DS 2.0 protocol. And it might also be a choice that during registration for a wallet, this is used, it's applied, the non-payment authentication, and you might want to have such a whitelisting happening exactly at that point. Then the logic behind is that only if a transaction is completed, or excuse me, only if the authentication is completed successfully, then the merchant is added to the whitelist of that card. And it also adds the date of the addition. As we have seen in the demo, the OTP with security question flow Here I display just for illustration purpose how it could look like with an app authentication out of band, or also with a pure OTP one-time passcode authentication on the right-hand side. With the app authentication on the left-hand side, it's important to understand that this checkbox has to be clicked before authentication in the app, because as soon as the app authentication happened, this screen is going to be closed and the cardholder is returned to the shop. So there is no chance anymore to click the checkbox. It's a bit different from this OTP flow, where he can either first click the checkbox or enter the OTP code and then submit it by clicking on pay. And of course, it should not be forgotten that there is also a new flow going on. New flow is going to be supported with the 3DS 2.0 transactions. It's the payments which are originating from an app. So now you can also have a 3D secure payment being started from an app shop or mobile device. And this is how it would look like in a flow with a native app. You would first, to the left-hand side, you would have just the screen asking for a one-time passcode. And here as well, I have OTP with security question registered. So the second screen, after I click on pay, I would get a second screen which, sorry, I did a mix up. The first screen is empty. I received the SMS. Then on the second screen that we have here on the slide, you would enter the code that I have received via SMS and you pay, click pay. Afterwards, you answer the security question and you would again submit this one. And then as a last page, you would come to the whitelisting option where you can choose, or you have to choose, if you want to trust the merchant or you are not interested in this feature. That's a little bit different from the way how it is implemented due to the protocol specification, which would not allow to have the same flow as we have seen in the browser-based channel. After successful transaction from an app as well, then the merchant would be whitelisted on that card. Also, we have seen that a cardholder can remove or manage the list of trusted merchants, so he can have a look into the list through the registration portal. We offer such the registration portal out of the box with our service, but it might also be that there is a different portal in place from the bank, which could also be used, of course. I come back to that just in a second. In our registration portal, the whitelist is displayed, and then he could choose if he wants to remove one or several merchants at a time, and he gets a small feedback that this happened successfully. Also here, the prerequisite is that there is a strong customer authentication in place, so it can only then it would be compliant with PSD2. Alternatively, as I just mentioned, it could also be that you have already such a portal in place or a management possibility, and if that's the case, then you could actually integrate web services that we offer to our 3D Secure Issuer service. It's the issuing and the info web service, who could be used to actually read and write on the cards, the card whitelist or the whitelist of a card. I would suggest to go through these just very quickly. It's rather backup, and you will have it in the slides. And turn to the administration tools that an issuer has. So now we have just seen the side of the cardholder, what he would experience and how he could use this feature. But also you as a bank, as an issuer, you have an interest to steer and control how the feature is used. Before looking into the slides, I'd like to jump to the demo again. Now as an administrator, or as a, let's say, I'm a call center employee, and a cardholder is calling me. I enter here this card again. Should be still here, yeah. This cardholder is calling me and asking, he is not happy with one of the merchants anymore, but he was not capable to use the registration portal, or for any other reasons. He asks if actually the call center employee could remove or at least view the merchants that he has on the card whitelisted. So I have here still Fleurop, a flower shop, and I have another demo shop, an etc. demo shop whitelisted on my card. And as a call center employee, I could actually even remove here a merchant from the card's whitelist. Even though now we have to be clear about that, it would require a strong customer authentication from side of the caller, and only then this activity could be pursued. But I assume now I have such a strong authentication, and I remove that merchant. From now, it's only one trusted merchant on my card anymore. And if I would shop at this etc. Shop, then I should not experience a frictionless transaction anymore. To illustrate, I did some small mistake in my demo. To illustrate, I remove as well the Fleurop shop, which would have provoked a frictionless transaction. So I remove it, and I can do another transaction at Fleurop afterwards with the same card, and it should not be frictionless. So it will ask me again the cardholder authentication, including also the option to whitelist this shop again. So just to illustrate, I do that now, and we can have a look that this really works. So I add it again to the whitelist. And if I refresh my card view here, then I can see this merchant is again added to the card's whitelist. Now, as an issuer, I still have the chance not to edit only the card's whitelist, but I have also the chance to manage a global whitelist, which can steer at which merchants this feature actually would be available at all. So I have such a possibility to maintain a list of merchants as a bank, as an issuer, merchants which I trust specifically, and maybe which I also want to start with if I start the rollout of this merchant whitelisting feature. And you can see here all the shops that we have used before for whitelisting have been already on that global whitelist, because it is a precondition in our feature that the whitelisting option, the checkbox during the challenge screen, is only displayed for these merchants. And also a transaction is only passing frictionless afterwards if the merchant is on the whitelist of the card, so whitelisted by the cardholder, and also here still whitelisted by the bank, so on this global whitelist. Or it could be the case that the bank later on disables this whole list, the whole global whitelist, and says, well, I open it up to all merchants. I don't need such a restriction. And then, of course, frictionless transactions can happen at any merchant where the cardholder has chosen to whitelist. Only if risk would say, well, that's a fraudulent or a suspect situation, only then a cardholder authentication would be prompted. We can now do that. I would remove the Fleurop shop from my global whitelist. And now I would expect that even though we can again have a look at the card, even though we have it whitelisted on the card, it's still here, Fleurop. But now if I do another shopping process at Fleurop, it should not it should actually not pass frictionless because the issuer, the bank, doesn't trust him anymore, trust this merchant anymore. And that's actually true. It prompts for an authentication again. And as you also can see, there is no checkbox available to whitelist this merchant. Now, yeah, we can finish that one as well. I think we have enough time. And I would just pay at this merchant. If I refresh here again, I can see this last transaction also being successful. Without merchant whitelisting, before we had here several other activities, which all of them can be looked up through this cards view. So as we have seen for the management of the global and the card whitelist, now we have seen it's actually two lists which are in place in this feature. The global whitelist is the one that is managed, maintained by the issuer, by the bank, and he can choose which merchants he wants to have on this whitelist, on this global whitelist. This is defining actually at which merchants you would generally allow the application of such an exemption. It is configurable if this list is used or not, so you could also open it up later on. Maybe you would like to start with only one or two merchants, then you increase to a few more, and later on you would say, oh, I don't need this restriction at all. I want to open the feature to all shops because cardholders would like to have this possibility to choose at every shop that they shop. And then you could still, in your risk tool, you could still have a blacklist, of course, of shops which are really not trustful for you, which you would like to exclude from the exemption. And this risk blacklist would then always oversteer the whitelisting exemption, which we have seen here. What I have also shown that the cardholder, the admin UI user, it could be a call center employee, can also manage the card whitelist. In the case there is a strong customer authentication, of course, only then he might remove a merchant from the list, or he could just, if he would not have the strong customer authentication, he could just view and give information to the cardholder which merchant is actually whitelisted. For all of these features in the admin UI, we have a user role concept in place, which has an underlying feature permission per feature. And it would be up to the possibility for the bank also to choose if his employees are allowed actually to make use of such a removal here or not. And then it is also possible to do the management of a card whitelist through web services. As we have said before, we have the card info and the card issuer web service, card issuing web service, which are usually used also for other exchange of information between the ACS and the issuer backend system. And through these web services, you could also read and write the whitelist of a card. This might be especially interesting if you have e-banking portals or an existing card portal or so in place from which you would like to offer the management of such a whitelist feature of the card whitelist. Almost last but not least, it's also very important to mention that there is a possibility for reporting or transaction monitoring and analysis. As this is a very new feature and there is not a lot of experience from the market yet, maybe new fraud patterns are going to evolve with these PSD2 exemptions. Maybe your call center is going to be called for new reasons, and that's why we think it's very important that you have enough tools as well for analysis and monitoring of this exemption. So there is out-of-the-box reports which we offer, where you have a complete transaction list with all the exemptions that have been applied and several other attributes per transaction. You have also transaction statistics which we provide. There you could see for a given time frame how many transactions have been passing successfully or not successfully, and so on, with which reasons. And then in the admin UI, we have seen in this cards view that it is possible to trace back any activity on a card, which allows then also fraud analysts to do a deep dive for analysis of suspected fraud. And then there is two more options which you might be interested to use. One is that you could make use of transaction data in your risk tool. As we have seen, most of you have one in place. You could actually transmit after the transaction in the ACS is completed. You could transmit the results to a risk tool. This is currently only supported for our own risk solution, which we host and operate by Netcetera. We use Risk Shield from the company Inform, and for customers who are on that risk tool, it is possible today to transfer all this information into Risk Shield so that you can again increase the data within risk and increase the accuracy of any risk advice or risk-based decision. Another option is the transaction push web service. It's an extension feature to the product, and this allows the transmission of near real-time transaction data. It's thought to support also dynamic linking use case and fraud reporting use cases within the PSD2 area. And it might be another option how you could monitor and analyze the data from this exemption. Now I see I'd like to give some time for questions. Maybe we can do a very brief look into these configuration options, just to give you maybe this outlook that there is a lot of configuration options available. Basically, we are very flexible to support banks or issuers to implement such a feature. This goes from defining for which card portfolio, so for down to a bin range level, you could tell if such an exemption should be applied or not. Then you could choose in the configuration of the merchant whitelisting, you can choose with which risk scores it should be allowed at all or not allowed. So if you have maybe 4 risk scores coming into the ACS from your risk tool, you could then define with which of these scores this exemption may be applied. Then you have this global whitelist that you can use to manage the rollout as well. And there is this registration portal possibility. You can configure if it should be given to the cardholder or not. You can have own texts and brands in the purchase and in the challenge screens, and also in the registration portal. And of course, you have also the possibility to give permissions to admin UI users, so who should be able to edit this global or the card whitelist, and so on, depending on web services being integrated, etc. There is a lot of options. And now, before coming to the questions, again, I'd like to get back to the initial question of the webinar, how to increase frictionless transactions with 3D Secure and whitelisting. I think this page should summarize a little bit what we see as a major potential of using merchant whitelisting in this for this background. So the cardholder is empowered to choose if he wants to do strong customer authentication or frictionless for trusted merchants. You give, in that sense, actually you give this opportunity to the cardholder, and he will appreciate that, as you have very different individuals as customers. we think it's a very powerful method also to comfort your cardholders. At the same time, you keep control through a risk tool or also a global whitelist or both. So you monitor all the transactions, and if there is a suspected fraud, the risk tool would jump in and the exemption would not be allowed, would not be applied. Then it has also benefit in terms of the PSD2 effective date from the 14th September. From that point, the risk-based authentications are going to be limited to these amount limits that we mentioned. And as from then, you will have maybe less frictionless transactions from risk-based authentications. This merchant whitelisting adds again to increase your frictionless payments. We offer a scalable approach. The whole solution is you could start with only one merchant. We have one customer actually who started with only one merchant being allowed on the global whitelist, and they gather now experiences, they learn from that. And once they trust how the feature and the transactions, the cardholders, everybody performs these transactions, then they could actually open it up and add more merchants to the global whitelist, or later on open it completely and only have a blacklisting risk. And as a last point, the solution works with all schemes. As I said, initially it supports the different protocol versions, so it could be used and applied immediately. And it can be combined with other authenticators, often etc. ACS2, which gives you a lot of flexibility to combine to your liking. So with that, we would like to thank you and open up to the questions. Which direction are you going to choose? Do we have a few questions?
There was one question. I responded already in the chat, but just to repeat it verbally, the question was whether the information, if the cardholder whitelisted the merchant during the challenge, is somehow passed back to the merchants. And the answer is it depends on the protocol version, but with the message extensions planned from MasterCard based on 2.1, which will be launched in the next weeks, this will be possible, and it will also be possible based on 3DS 2.2, which will be launched later this year. So there are additional flags to pass back the information about this activity.
Do we have any more questions? Is there questions in the audience right now? You could type them in the chat. If not, then we are very happy that you joined us today. And as I said initially, we are going to share the slides and the recording. And also we would like to ask for your feedback about this webinar, and also if you're interested in future such webinars about specific topics from etc. So thank you very much and have a very nice afternoon.